The sun was still hanging low over the mountains when three friends stepped onto a forgotten hiking trail deep inside Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Their names were Callum Mercer, Brennan Vale, and Keir Ashcroft. They had spent years exploring trails across America, always searching for places that felt untouched by civilization. They believed every forest had a story waiting to be discovered. This one felt different from the very beginning. The air was unusually cold for early autumn, not freezing, just cold enough to make the silence feel uncomfortable. Callum adjusted his backpack and smiled. "So this is the trail nobody talks about," Brennan laughed. "Exactly why we're here." Keir lifted his camera, recording the towering trees stretching endlessly toward the gray sky. "If this place is as beautiful as the photos online, this trip is going to be worth it." None of them realized. The pictures they had seen online had been taken miles away from where they were standing now. For nearly 2 hours, everything felt perfectly normal. The forest was peaceful. The leaves rustled gently. A cool breeze drifted between the enormous trees. Birds sang from somewhere above. They joked, shared snacks, stopped several times to take photographs. It was the kind of trip they had imagined for months. Then something changed. Without warning, every sound disappeared. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. The silence arrived so suddenly that all three of them stopped walking at exactly the same moment. Brennan frowned. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Callum asked. "Exactly." Keir slowly lowered his camera. "There isn't anything." The silence felt unnatural, like the entire forest had stopped breathing. After nearly 30 seconds, the sounds slowly returned. Birds, wind, leaves, everything continued as if nothing had happened. Callum forced a smile. "Probably just our imagination." None of them believed it. They continued hiking. About another mile ahead, they reached a narrow fork in the trail. One path looked clean and well-maintained. The other was almost hidden beneath thick vines and fallen branches. A weathered wooden post leaned crooked beside it. The writing had almost disappeared. Only a few faded letters remained. "Turn back." Keir chuckled. "Guess someone really wanted people to stay away." Brennan pushed the vines aside, which usually means that's where the interesting stuff is. Callum hesitated for only a second. Then he followed. The hidden trail felt completely different. The trees grew much closer together. Their branches blocked most of the sunlight. The deeper they walked, the darker the forest became. Even though it was still afternoon, the air smelled damp, almost like old stone after heavy rain. None of them spoke much anymore. Something about the place made casual conversation feel wrong. After another 30 minutes, Callum looked at his GPS. No signal. Keir checked his own. "Mine too?" Brennan laughed nervously. "We'll just use the trail." Callum looked behind them. There wasn't one. The path they had been following had disappeared. Only thick forest remained. "Okay," Callum said quietly. "That's not funny." Nobody answered. They all knew none of them had turned around. Yet somehow, the trail was gone. Brennan tried marking a nearby tree with a small pocket knife. "If we start walking in circles, we'll know." They chose one direction, walked for almost 20 minutes, then stopped. The tree stood directly in front of them, the fresh knife mark still cut across the bark. Keir stared at it. No way." We walked straight. Callum felt his heartbeat speeding up. "We need to keep moving." As evening approached, a thick gray mist slowly rolled through the forest. Visibility dropped with every passing minute. The trees became strange shadows. Everything farther than 20 feet simply disappeared. Keir suddenly stopped walking. "Did you hear footsteps?" Everyone froze. Crunch sounds. Someone was definitely walking. Not ahead of them, not behind them, somewhere beside them, keeping exactly the same pace. Every time they walked, the footsteps walked. Every time they stopped, the footsteps stopped. Callum shouted into the trees, "Who's there?" Nothing answered, only silence. They hurried forward. The footsteps followed, always hidden, never visible. Brennan whispered, "I don't think we're alone." No one disagreed. Nearly an hour later, the mist finally began to thin. The forest opened into a quiet clearing. In the middle lay a perfectly still lake. The water looked almost black beneath the fading evening sky. Not a single ripple disturbed its surface. The place felt strangely peaceful compared to the endless trees. Callum sighed with relief. "We'll stay here tonight." Keir wasn't convinced. "I don't like this place." Brennan looked around. "Honestly, I don't like anywhere anymore." Still, they were exhausted. They pitched their tent near the shoreline, built a small campfire, and tried to convince themselves that everything would feel normal again after sunrise. But as darkness slowly swallowed the forest, something unseen was already watching them from beneath the black water. Darkness settled over the forest faster than any of them expected. The small campfire crackled softly, casting orange light across the trees while everything beyond it disappeared into complete blackness. The lake remained perfectly still. Not a single wave, not even the wind disturbed its surface. Callum sat quietly, staring into the fire. "I've been hiking for years, and I've never seen a forest this silent." Keir looked toward the lake. "It feels like we're not supposed to be here." Brennan forced a smile. "We've scared ourselves all day. Tomorrow morning we'll find the trail and laugh about this." Nobody answered. Deep inside, none of them believed that anymore. Hours passed. The fire slowly burned lower. One by one they climbed inside the tent. Callum checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. Outside, everything was silent. Too silent. He closed his eyes. Sleep came quickly. A sudden sound woke him. Splash. His eyes opened immediately. Another splash, this time louder. Callum held his breath. Someone was walking through water, slowly, deliberately. He quietly unzipped the tent. The campfire had almost gone out. The lake reflected the pale moonlight. Everything looked normal. Then he noticed something. Brennan was gone. "Brennan?" No answer. Callum looked around the campsite. His backpack was still there. His boots were gone. "Keir," Callum whispered urgently. Keir woke instantly. "What happened?" "Brennan isn't here." The two of them stepped outside. "Brennan!" Callum shouted. Only the echo answered. Then, splash. Both of them turned toward the lake. A figure stood near the edge of the water. It looked exactly like Brennan. He wasn't moving. He was simply standing there, facing the lake. "Brennan!" Keir yelled. Still nothing. The two friends run toward him. "Brennan!" Callum reached out. Just before his hand touched Brennan's shoulder, Brennan slowly turned around. His face was pale. His eyes looked empty, almost as if he wasn't fully awake. "What are you doing?" Callum asked. Brennan spoke in a quiet voice. "I heard someone calling my name. I thought it was you." Neither of them had left the tent. Callum grabbed Brennan's arm. "Let's get away from the water." The moment Brennan took one step backward, the surface of the lake exploded. A violent force shot upward from beneath the water. Something unseen wrapped around Brennan's legs. He screamed. "What?" Before anyone could react, he was dragged into the lake. The water swallowed him instantly. "Brennan!" Callum jumped toward the shore. Keir grabbed his backpack and threw himself into the freezing water without thinking. The lake looked shallow from the outside. Inside, it felt impossibly deep, impossibly. Keir dove beneath the surface. Nothing. Only endless darkness. He searched desperately. His flashlight beam disappeared into black water that seemed to have no bottom. Then, for a single second, he saw Brennan, far below, much deeper than should have been possible. Brennan was struggling violently, his arms stretched upward, as if someone beneath him was pulling him farther down. Keir kicked toward him with everything he had. Suddenly, a shadow moved underneath Brennan. Not a fish, not an animal, something shaped almost like a person, only impossibly tall. Its long arms wrapped around Brennan before both figures disappeared into complete darkness. Keir froze. Every instinct told him to swim away. He shot back toward the surface. The moment he broke through the water, Callum pulled him onto the shore. "Where is he?" Keir couldn't answer. He simply stared at the lake. Seconds later, the water became perfectly still again. No bubbles, no ripples, no sign Brennan had ever been there. It was as if the lake had erased him. Neither of them slept. They sat beside the dying fire until sunrise. Neither spoke much. Every few minutes, one of them looked toward the lake, waiting, hoping. Nothing ever returned. When daylight finally reached the clearing, Callum stood. "We're leaving." Keir nodded immediately. Neither looked back as they packed their gear. Within minutes they were walking as fast as they could through the forest. The only thing they wanted was to get out. But the forest wasn't finished with them yet. After nearly 2 hours of non-stop walking, Callum suddenly stopped. His face turned white. Keir looked ahead. His stomach dropped. There, in front of them, was the same black lake. The same campsite. The same burned campfire. Even their footprints from the night before were still pressed into the muddy ground. Keir whispered, "No, we've been walking in a straight line." Callum slowly turned in every direction. The forest looked exactly the same. No matter which way they chose, it felt like the trees were quietly closing around them. For the first time since entering the forest, they both realized the terrifying truth. They weren't lost. The forest simply wasn't letting them leave. Morning should have brought hope. Instead, it brought fear. Callum and Keir stood in complete silence, staring at the same black lake they had left hours earlier. Neither of them could understand how they had returned. Callum looked at Keir. "We're not stopping again. We keep walking, no matter what happens." Keir nodded without saying a word. They left the lake behind once more. This time they didn't look back. The forest felt different now. The trees seemed taller. The shadows seemed darker. Every few minutes, one of them thought they saw someone standing between the trees. Whenever they looked again, nothing was there. Hours passed. Their food was almost gone. Their phones had died. Even their watches had stopped at exactly 11:47. Neither watch moved again. Callum tried not to panic. "There has to be a way out," Keir answered quietly. "I don't think this place wants us to find one." Late that afternoon, the trees finally opened. Ahead of them stretched a narrow rocky path leading toward a steep cliff. Beyond it, the mountains disappeared beneath a sea of gray mist. It looked like the only possible way forward. As they carefully crossed the uneven ground, Keir suddenly stopped. "Callum, look!" About 50 yards away, someone was standing near the edge of the cliff. The figure faced away from them. It looked exactly like Brennan. His hiking jacket, his backpack, everything. "Brennan!" Keir shouted. The figure didn't move. Callum grabbed Keir's arm. "Don't! Something isn't right." But Keir pulled away. "It has to be him. He survived." Keir ran toward the figure. "Brennan!" The figure slowly raised one hand, as if asking him to come closer. Callum felt every hair on his arm stand up. Something about the movement wasn't human. It was too slow, too unnatural. "Keir! Stop!" But Keir kept running. He was only a few steps away. Then, the figure slowly turned around. It wasn't Brennan. Its face was pale and stretched into an impossible smile. Its eyes were nothing but endless darkness. Keir froze before he could step back. An invisible force slammed into him. His body was thrown backward toward the edge. Callum sprinted forward. Keir! Their hands almost touched. Almost. Keir lost his balance. For one terrifying second, he hung over the edge. Fear filled his eyes. Then, he disappeared into the thick white mist below. His scream echoed through the mountains, until even that vanished. Silence returned. The figure was gone. Only the empty cliff remained. Callum couldn't breathe. He stood there shaking. Now, he was completely alone. The forest became silent once again. Then, a single footstep echoed behind him. Callum turned. No one. Another footstep. Closer. Then another and another. Something unseen was walking toward him, slowly, patiently. Callum didn't wait. He ran. Branches whipped across his face. Roots caught at his boots. He stumbled, recovered, and kept running. Behind him, the footsteps never stopped. They matched his speed perfectly. No matter how fast he ran, they stayed close. He didn't dare look back. Every instinct told him that if he did, he would never leave the forest. The trees suddenly became thinner. A cold wind rushed past him. For the first time since entering the cursed place, he saw sunlight ahead, a break in the trees. He pushed himself harder. The footsteps were almost beside him now. His lungs burned. His legs felt numb. But he refused to stop. With one final burst of strength, he crossed the tree line. The footsteps stopped. Instantly, the silence was overwhelming. Callum slowly turned around. The forest stood completely still. Nothing moved. Nothing followed him. For several long seconds, he simply stared at the trees. Then he noticed something. Deep between the trunks, 3 motionless figures were standing in the darkness. 1, 2, 3. They never moved. They simply watched him. A cold chill ran through his body. He blinked. The figures were gone. Only empty forest remained. Callum never hiked alone again, even years later. Some nights he still wakes suddenly at exactly 11:47 p.m. Whenever he closes his eyes, he remembers the black lake, the empty cliff, and the feeling that something was silently following every step he took. Sometimes, when the world becomes completely quiet, he hears slow footsteps outside his window, but he never looks, because deep inside, he knows the forest never truly let him go. Maybe it only allowed him to leave.